At the Earth's Core by Edgar Rice Burroughs. 14. The Garden of Eden, Part 1. I awoke, rested but hungry, and pushing the boulder aside, crawled out upon the little rocky shelf which was my front porch. Before me spread a small but beautiful valley, through the centre of which a clear and sparkling river wound its way down to an inland sea, the blue waters of which were just visible between the two mountain ranges which embraced this little paradise. The sides of the opposite hills were green with verdure, for a great forest clothed them to the foot of the red and yellow and copper green of the towering crags which formed their summit. The valley itself was carpeted with a luxuriant grass, while here and there patches of wild flowers made great splashes of vivid colour against the prevailing green. Dotted over the face of the valley were little clusters of palm-like trees, 3 or 4 together as a rule. Beneath these stood antelope, while others grazed in the open, or wandered gracefully to a nearby ford to drink. There were several species of this beautiful animal, the most magnificent somewhat resembling the giant eland of Africa, except that their spiral horns form a complete curve backward over their ears, and then forward again beneath them, ending in sharp and formidable points some 2 feet before the face and above the eyes. In size they remind one of a pure-bred Hereford bull, yet they are very agile and fast. The broad yellow bands that striped the dark roan of their coats made me take them for zebra when I first saw them. All in all, they are handsome animals, and added the finishing touch to the strange and lovely landscape that spread before my new home. I had determined to make the cave my headquarters, and with it as a base make a systematic exploration of the surrounding country in search of the land of Sari. First I devoured the remainder of the carcass of the orthopi I had killed before my last sleep. Then I hid the great secret in a deep niche at the back of my cave, rolled the boulder before my front door, and with bow, arrows, sword, and shield scrambled down into the peaceful valley. The gazing herds moved to one side as I passed through them, the little orthopi showing the greatest wariness and galloping to safest distances. All the animals stopped feeding as I approached, and after moving to what they considered a safe distance, stood contemplating me with serious eyes and up-cocked ears. Once one of the old bull antelopes of the striped species lowered his head and bellowed angrily, even taking a few steps towards my direction, so that I thought he meant to charge, but after I had passed he resumed feeding as though nothing had disturbed him. Near the lower end of the valley I passed a number of tapirs, and across the river saw a great sadok, the enormous double-horned progenitor of the modern rhinoceros. At the valley's end, the cliffs upon the left ran out into the sea, so that to pass around them as I desired to do, it was necessary to scale them in search of a ledge along which I might continue my journey. Some 50 feet from the base I came upon a projection which formed a natural path along the face of the cliff, and this I followed out over the sea toward the cliff's end. Here the ledge inclined rapidly upward toward the top of the cliffs. The stratum which formed it evidently had been forced up at this steep angle when the mountains behind it were born. As I climbed carefully up the ascent, my attention suddenly was attracted aloft by the sound of strange hissing and what resembled the flapping of wings. And at the first glance there broke upon my horrified vision the most frightful thing I had ever seen within Pellucidar. It was a giant dragon such as is pictured in the legends and fairy tales of earthfolk. Its huge body must have measured 40 feet in length, while the bat-like wings that supported it in mid-air had a spread of fully 30. Its gaping jaws were armed with long, sharp teeth, and its claw equipped with horrible talons. The hissing noise which had first attracted my attention was issuing from its throat, and seemed to be directed at something beyond and below me which I could not see. The ledge upon which I stood terminated abruptly a few paces farther on, and as I reached the end I saw the cause of the reptile's agitation. Some time in past ages an earthquake had produced a fault at this point, so that beyond the spot where I stood the strata had slipped down a matter of 20 feet. The result was that the continuation of my ledge lay 20 feet below me, where it ended as abruptly as did the end upon which I stood. And here, evidently halted in flight by this insurmountable break in the ledge, stood the object of the creature's attack, a girl cowering upon the narrow platform, her face buried in her arms as though to shut out the sight of the frightful death which hovered just above her. The dragon was circling lower, and seemed about to dart in upon its prey. There was no time to be lost, scarce an instant in which to weigh the possible chances that I had against the awfully armed creature. But the sight of that frightened girl below me called out all that was best in me, and the instinct for the protection of the other sex, which nearly must have equalled the instinct of self-preservation in primeval man, drew me to the girl's side like an irresistible magnet. Almost thoughtless of the consequences, I leapt from the end of the ledge upon which I stood for the tiny shelf 20 feet below. At the same instant the dragon darted in toward the girl, but my sudden advent upon the scene must have startled him, for he veered to one side, and then rose above us once more. The noise I made as I landed beside her convinced the girl that the end had come, for she thought I was the dragon. But finally, when no cruel fangs closed upon her, she raised her eyes in astonishment. As they fell upon me, the expression that came into them would be difficult to describe, but her feelings could scarcely have been one whit more complicated than my own, for the wide eyes that looked into mine were those of Diane the Beautiful. "Diane!" I cried. "Diane, thank God that I came in time!" "You!" she whispered, and then she hid her face again, nor could I tell whether she were glad or angry that I had come. Once more the dragon was sweeping toward us, and so rapidly that I had no time to unsling my bow. All that I could do was snatch up a rock and hurl it at the thing's hideous face. Again my aim was true, and with a hiss of pain and rage the reptile wheeled once more and soared away. Quickly I fitted an arrow now, that I might be ready for the next attack, and as I did so I looked down at the girl, so that I surprised her in a surreptitious glance which she was stealing at me, but immediately she again covered her face with her hands. "Look at me, Diane," I pleaded. "Are you not glad to see me?" She looked straight into my eyes. "I hate you," she said, and then, as I was about to beg for a fair hearing, she pointed over my shoulder. "The Thiptar comes," she said, and I turned again to meet the reptile. So this was a Thiptar. I might have known it, the cruel bloodhound of the Mahars, the long-extinct pterodactyl of the outer world. But this time I met it with a weapon it had never faced before. I had selected my longest arrow, and with all my strength had bent the bow until the very tip of the shaft rested upon the thumb of my left hand. And then, as the great creature darted towards us, I let drive straight for that tough breast. Hissing like the escape valve of a steam engine, the mighty creature fell, turning and twisting into the sea below, my arrow burrowed completely in its carcass. I turned toward the girl. She was looking past me. It was evident that she had seen the Thiptar die. "Diane," I said, "won't you tell me that you are not sorry that I found you?" "I hate you," was her only reply. But I imagined that there was less vehemence in it than before, yet it might have been my imagination. "Why do you hate me, Diane?" I asked. But she did not answer me. "What are you doing here?" I asked, "and what has happened to you since Hujar freed you from the Sagoths?" At first I thought she was going to ignore me entirely, but finally she thought better of it. "I was again running from Jubal the Ugly One," she said. "After I escaped from the Sagoths, I made my way alone back to my own land, but on account of Jubal, I did not dare enter the villages or let any of my friends know that I had returned, for fear that Jubal might find out. By watching for a long time, I found that my brother had not yet returned, and so I continued to live in a cave beside a valley, which my race seldom frequents, awaiting the time that he should come back and free me from Jubal. But at last one of Jubal's hunters saw me as I was creeping towards my father's cave to see if my brother had yet returned, and he gave the alarm, and Jubal set out after me. He has been pursuing me across many lands. He cannot be far behind me now. When he comes, he will kill you and carry me back to his cave. He is a terrible man. I have gone as far as I can go, and there is no escape." She looked hopelessly at the continuation of the ledge 20 feet above us. "But he shall not have me," she suddenly cried with great vehemence. "The sea is there," she pointed over the edge of the cliff, "and the sea shall have me rather than Jubal." "But I have you now, Diane," I cried, "nor shall Jubal or any other have you, for you are mine." And I seized her hand, nor did I lift it above her head and let it fall in token of release. She had risen to her feet and was looking straight into my eyes with level gaze. "I do not believe you," she said, "for if you meant it, you would have done this when the others were present to witness it. Then I should truly have been your mate. Now there is no one to see you do it, for you know that without witnesses your act does not bind you to me." She withdrew her hand from mine and turned away. I tried to convince her that I was sincere, but she simply couldn't forget the humiliation that I had put upon her on that other occasion. "If you mean all that you say, you will have ample chance to prove it," she said, "if Jubal does not catch and kill you." I am in your power, and the treatment you accord me will be the best proof of your intentions. I am not your mate, and again I tell you that I hate you, and that I should be glad if I never saw you again." Diane was certainly candid. There was no gainsaying that. In fact, I found candour and directness to be quite a marked characteristic of the cavemen of Pellucidar. Finally, I suggested that we make some attempt to gain my cave, where we might escape the searching Jubal, for I am free to admit that I had no considerable desire to meet the formidable and ferocious creature of whose mighty prowess Diane had told me when I first met her. He it was who, armed with a puny knife, had met and killed a cave-bear in a hand-to-hand struggle. It was Jubal who could cast his spear entirely through the armoured carcass of the Sadok at 50 paces. It was he who had crushed the skull of a charging Dirith with a single blow of his war-club. No, I was not pining to meet the ugly one, and it was quite certain that I should not go out and hunt for him. But the matter was taken out of my hands very quickly, as is so often the way, and I did meet Jubal the Ugly One, face to face. This is how it happened. I had led Diane back along the ledge the way she had come, searching for a path that would lead us to the top of the cliff, for I knew that we could then cross over to the edge of my own little valley, where I felt certain we should find a means of ingress from the top cliff. As we proceeded along the ledge, I gave Diane minute directions for finding my cave against the chance of something happening to me. I knew that she would be quite safely hidden away from pursuit once she gained the shelter of my lair, and the valley would afford her ample means of sustenance. Also, I was very much piqued by her treatment of me. My heart was sad and heavy. I wanted to make her feel badly by suggesting that something terrible might happen to me, that I might in fact be killed. But it didn't work worth a cent, at least as far as I could perceive. Diane simply shrugged those magnificent shoulders of hers and murmured something to the effect that one was not rid of trouble so easily as that. For a while I kept still. I was utterly squelched, and to think that I had twice protected her from attack, the last time risking my life to save hers. It was incredible that even a daughter of the Stone Age could be so ungrateful, so heartless, but maybe her heart partook of the qualities of her epoch. Presently we found a rift in the cliff, which had been widened and extended by the action of the water draining through it from the plateau above. It gave us a rather rough climb to the summit, but finally we stood upon the level mesa which stretched back for several miles to the mountain range. Behind us lay the broad inland sea, curving upward in the horizonless distance to merge into the blue of the sky, so that for all the world it looked as though the sea lapped back to arch completely over us and disappear beyond the distant mountains at our back. The weird and uncanny aspect of the seascapes of Pellucidar balk description. At our right lay a dense forest, but to the left the country was open and clear to the plateau's farthest verge. It was in this direction that our way led, and we had turned to resume our journey when Diane touched my arm. I turned to her, thinking that she was about to make peace overtures, but I was mistaken. "Jubal," she said, nodding towards the forest. I looked, and there, emerging from the dense wood, came a perfect whale of a man. He must have been 7 feet tall, and proportioned accordingly. He was still too far off to distinguish his features. "Run," I said to Diane. "I can engage him until you get a good start. Maybe I can hold him until you have gotten entirely away." And then, without a backward glance, I advanced to meet the ugly one. I had hoped that Diane would have a kind word to say to me before she went, for she must have known that I was going to my death for her sake. But she never even so much as bid me good-bye, and it was with a heavy heart that I strode through the flower-bespangled grass to my doom. When I had come close enough to Jubal to distinguish his features, I understood how it was that he had earned the sobriquet of Ugly One. Apparently some fearful beast had ripped away one entire side of his face. The eye was gone, the nose and all the flesh, so that his jaws and all his teeth are exposed and grinning through the horrible scar. Formerly he may have been as good to look upon as the others of his handsome race, and it may be that the terrible result of this encounter had tended to sour any already strong and brutal character. However this may be, it is quite certain that he was not a pretty sight, and now that his features, or what remained of them, were distorted in rage at the sight of Diane with another male, he was indeed most terrible to see, and much more terrible to meet. He had broken into a run now, and as he advanced he raised his mighty spear, while I halted, and fitting an arrow to my bow, took as steady aim as I could. I was somewhat longer than usual, for I must confess that the sight of this awful man had wrought upon my nerves to such an extent that my knees were anything but steady. What chance had I against this mighty warrior, for whom the fiercest cave-bear had no terrors? Could I hope to best one who had slaughtered the Sadok and the Dirith, single-handed? I shuddered, but in fairness to myself, my fear was more for Diane than for my own fate. And then the great brute launched his massive stone-tipped spear, and I raised my shield to break the force of its terrific velocity. The impact hurled me to my knees, but the spear had deflected the missile, and I was unscathed. Jubal was rushing upon me now with the only remaining weapon that he carried, a murderous-looking knife. He was too close for a careful bowshot, but I let drive at him as he came, without taking aim. My arrow pierced the fleshy part of his thigh, inflicting a painful but not disabling wound, and then he was upon me. My agility saved me for the instant. I ducked beneath his raised arm, and when he wheeled to come at me again, he found a sword's point in his face, and a moment later he felt an inch or two of it in the muscles of his knife arm, so that thereafter he went more warily. It was a duel of strategy now. The great hairy man manoeuvring to get inside my guard, where he could bring those giant thews to play, while my wits were directed to the task of keeping him at arm's length. Thrice he rushed me, and thrice I caught his knife blow upon my shield. Each time my sword found his body, once penetrating to his lungs. He was covered with blood by this time, and the internal hemorrhage induced paroxysms of coughing that brought the red stream through the hideous mouth and nose, covering his face and breast with bloody froth. He was a most unlovely spectacle, but he was far from dead. As the duel continued, I began to gain confidence, for, to be perfectly candid, I had not expected to survive the first rush of that monstrous engine of ungoverned rage and hatred, and I think that Jubal, from utter contempt of me, began to change to a feeling of respect, and then, in his primitive mind, there evidently loomed the thought that perhaps, at last, he had met his master, and was facing his end. At any rate, it is only upon this hypothesis that I can account for his next act, which was in the nature of a last resort, a sort of forlorn hope, which could only have been born of the belief that if he did not kill me quickly, I should kill him. It happened on the occasion of his fourth charge, when, instead of striking at me with his knife, he dropped that weapon, and seizing my sword-blade in both hands, wrenched the weapon from my grasp as easily as from a babe. Flinging it far to one side, he stood motionless for just an instant, glaring into my face with such a horrid leer of malignant triumph as to almost unnerve me. Then he sprang for me with his bare hands. But it was Jubal's day to learn new methods of warfare. For the first time he had seen a bow and arrows. Never before that duel had he beheld a sword, and now he learned what a man who knows may do with his bare fists. As he came for me like a great bear, I ducked again beneath his outstretched arm, and as I came up, planted as clean a blow upon his jaw as ever you have seen. Down went that great mountain of flesh, sprawling upon the ground. He was so surprised and dazed that he lay there for several seconds before he made any attempt to rise, and I stood over him with another dose ready when he should gain his knees. Up he came at last, almost roaring in his rage and mortification, but he didn't stay up. I let him have a left, fair on the point of the jaw that sent him tumbling over on his back. By this time I think Jubal had gone mad with hate, for no sane man would have come back for more as many times as he did. Time after time I bowled him over as fast as he could stagger up, until toward the last he lay longer on the ground between blows, and each time came up weaker than before. He was bleeding very profusely now from the wound in his lungs, and presently a terrific blow over the heart sent him reeling heavily to the ground, where he lay very still. And somehow I knew at once that Jubal, the ugly one, would never get up again. But even as I looked upon that massive body lying there so grim and terrible in death, I could not believe that I, single-handed, had bested this slayer of fearful beasts, this gigantic ogre of the Stone Age.